Well, hello there, and a warm welcome, in a sense, to this, the 229th edition of DF Direct Weekly, which is based on our prior shows, a weekly show based on the latest gaming and technology news. Joining me to discuss our packed lineup, first of all, John Linneman. Hello.
Hey, Rich, did you know sometimes you feed on a tree frog?
Do you?
I don't know if you... Yes, you do. That's what you have to do to survive, especially when climbing very long ladders.
I'm trying to figure this one out, but I don't even know where to begin. Yes, I'm here too, by the way.
Yes, Alex Battaglia, welcome. And of course, Digital Foundry is now a fully independent gaming media outlet. If you want to support the team, please consider our Patreon, and also check out our merchandising wares, store.digitalfoundry.net. But I think we should just crack on with our first news story. Okay, well, what can we say? Gamescom 2025. I was going to report on this last week, but obviously I was away. But we did go hands-on with the ROG Asus Xbox Ally and Ally X. Both Alex and I took a look at the unit. Alex more fleetingly, I think it's fair to say, Alex. Yes. Interesting stuff, because this is essentially the first, what you might call, well, can you call it an Xbox? A hybrid console PC? I'm not even sure it's that. But Alex, let's begin by talking about form factor, because I think it's really simple to cover this one off. If you could imagine an Asus ROG Ally with Xbox style handles and those impulse triggers, that's essentially what we're getting here, right? I mean, I think probably the least surprising element is the form factor, but I think those handles are pretty sweet, and it did seem to make the whole unit feel quite light and very easy to use, I thought.
I'd agree with that. I would also say there's a Switch 2 right here. You can't see it. But the thickness of the handheld is actually very important for someone, I think. All of us would probably say that. I do have trouble with the Switch 2s in my hands. It's just very thin, and I need something to grip on. I think Oliver talks about having pistol-style grips on all of his handhelds if he could. Maybe, like shotgun-style grips even. Oliver, who knows? It definitely, form factor, definitely one of the most positive aspects of what felt like 15 minutes with the ROG Ally Xbox X, whatever it's called.
Yes, I mean, there's not really too many complaints about that. It does actually feel quite light, but I think it is simply down to the amount of purchase that you've got. It is quite thick. I think it's fair to say both of them. I had a quick hands-on the non-X Ally as well. I also had a briefing with Asus and Xbox as well, which we'll talk about shortly. I do want to talk about the Xbox interface. I think there's some really good coverage out there, particularly from, as ever, the Forks, which is my go-to for handheld coverage. Xbox interface, it's actually really well done to a certain degree. It does give you access to all of the different storefronts. It does seem to give you access to all of the functionality you're going to need. There's some really interesting tweaks that they've made there. They have made the control sticks like a first-class citizen for accessing Windows, which I think is quite important. What I am going to say, though, is that, what can I say? If you're going to be booting up this machine and you're expecting an Xbox, I think that you're going to be a bit disappointed. It is a launcher, really, isn't it, Alex? It's a launcher, quite richly featured.
Whoa. Rich, are you saying this is not an Xbox?
Well, that's an interesting question. We're sort of talking about a more philosophical side of the whole Xbox Ally debate. But yes, I think right now it isn't an Xbox for reasons we'll discuss later. But going back to the interface, it is a very rich and fully featured interface. It can do things that other interfaces we have that have been made by the likes of Asus and Lenovo can do things that those can't. It's also interesting that you can do stuff like what is effectively sort of like, an alt tab. There's functions for that. And it's all kind of like presented almost like a console. But at the same time, what can I say? Let's put it brutally. What can I say? I found some pretty glaring bugs with the interface literally within minutes of picking it up. Xbox personnel were talking about a new build of Doom the Dark Ages that wasn't agreeing with the interface, but in the real world, there's going to be a multitude of software that may not be compliant with Microsoft standards. The first bug I had was with Doom the Dark Ages, and it basically looks like this when I tried moving in and out of the interface, just kind of hanged. There's not much I could do about that. The second time I had issues, the analog sticks stopped working within the interface, which was obviously making navigation difficult, right? On site, Microsoft staff had to step in to get the unit working again. It seemed to be some sort of joypad or stick configuration that they could access that got the interface working again. The third issue I had was something quite different. I was playing Gears Reloaded. I went back to the Xbox full screen experience, then loaded Doom the Dark Ages. Now, it didn't ask me whether I wanted to terminate Gears Reloaded, so it went ahead and loaded Doom while Gears was still resident in memory, which hammered performance. This is stuff that kind of should be taken care of by the interface, but wasn't. And in that respect, it kind of felt a bit unpolished and unfinished. Felt very reminiscent of the kinds of experiences I've had with pretty much every PC handheld I've tested so far using Windows. Here, that front end was doing things it shouldn't be doing. It certainly didn't have the feel of a more sort of bespoke, curated console experience that just kind of works. Bearing in mind that this machine's coming soon, I think it's still got a lot of work to do on the interface on the front end there. But when it behaves, it actually seems to be pretty good, don't you think, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, so my experience, I didn't experience any crashes, but I didn't have as much time to spend with it, perhaps as you did, because right as I got the thing in my hands, all of a sudden Jason Rowell walks up next to me and we're talking. So I was spending a lot less time looking at the device and interacting with it than I was with than perhaps you were. But still, in that short period of time, what I did try and do is look through the menu system. And the settings were kind of some mix of Xbox settings that you'd see in there, as well as a number of more PC configurable ones. The device did have a frame rate limiter, for example, which you wouldn't obviously find on a normal Xbox. But that, I think, wasn't so much part of the Xbox PC standard, but it might have been an aspect that was provided by the Ally.
Yes, that's exactly right. Side. Yeah, basically all of the sort of PC tweakable stuff that you would expect to find in an Asus ROG Ally is there. It's still there, and it's still the Armory crate that is providing this functionality. It's just kind of like more gracefully integrated into the Xbox interface there. I did speak to Jason Waddell about that, and it's like, well, shouldn't Microsoft be taking care of this? And I think that's basically one of the longer term aims that Microsoft are looking to do here. And there was continually the message that this is kind of like the beginning of the journey. They want to get some hardware out there, but we're going to be seeing a lot of features coming later, so to speak.
True. And the games that I did load up on it that they had available were Doom of the Dark Ages, as well as Clair Obscur Expedition 33, which I only had very brief amount of time with. But for Doom of the Dark Ages, I can comment on the performance. It was 1080p output using DRS, but DRS was at its lowest bound, which would have been performance mode, attached to FSR 3. And it was not using frame gen when I turned it off, because there was frame gen initially on and it didn't look right. It was like 80 FPS. FSR 3 frame gen isn't meant for 80 FPS outputs. And then so I turned it off, and it was roughly around the 50 FPS area on Doom the Dark Ages first level. And that ran fine, and I alt-tabbed out of it, and then I force quit it. I didn't actually quit in the menu. I used like the functionality to quit the game via alt-tab, kind of like you would on a console, where you back out of the game and you turn it off from the game, from the menu, like you could do on PS5 or Xbox Series X. That was all fine. And then I loaded up Clair Obscur, and that was the lowest settings, 1080p FSR, performance mode, and I think it's FSR, or was it TSR in that game? I forget off the top of my head. But basically that was like 27 to 30 FPS in just the game's intro.
Right.
Which isn't necessarily the biggest GPU heavy area in the game. So it's still within the power constraints of the, this hardware, and UE5 works fine enough on it. You could probably tweak that lower in some ways. I would say reducing the output resolution would be another way to get this to be going, because 1080p is quite high. But I still think people who are taking this as an Xbox console, from even the performance perspective, need to rein in their expectations, because even, the Series S in such a location, due to the tailoring of it, would be giving you a better experience than I got just by loading it up blindly here at 1080p. But that was really it. I couldn't induce crashing, but I can only imagine that the reasons why.
I think the thing for me was that the interface issues I encountered, it was really very basic stuff. And we were in the Xbox booth where we had an extremely limited amount of time. It's not as if I was trying to make it crash or to make it misbehave. I wanted to play some games on it. And, basically it's load up Doom, leave Doom, go back to the front menu, and that seemed to cause issues. Let's talk about Doom: The Dark Ages, because you actually touched on something that was quite interesting there, which is that the default settings were effectively 540p upscaling to 1080p with on low settings across the board, which I think is fine for a handheld.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the controversial bit, FSR3 frame generation, you said it didn't look right. I'd go further and say that it actually looked a lot worse and more less smooth than just running the game without frame gen at 50 frames per second. I think we both agreed on that. So I think there's going to be a case where certain PC technologies that may be fine on a desktop are just not a good fit for a handheld. And although you've got pretty much the most powerful PC handheld money can buy there, those issues aren't going to go away, right? I'm surprised that Doom: The Dark Ages was configured in that way, because that was the standard configuration, frame generation on. It just looked bad. It didn't look VRR to me. Whereas if you turned off frame gen and you're in that 50 FPS region, it actually looked pretty smooth, I thought.
That's very FSR3 frame gen in my experience. Right. When you use it on any PC, it never quite looks right. It always has this kind of juddery appearance to my eyes, which is why I don't really like it. So I'm not surprised to hear that.
I wouldn't be surprised if, based upon how they were dealing with VRR in windowed mode over Vulkan. So that's a Vulkan game. And Vulkan, to get VRR working in Vulkan, at least under the NVIDIA driver, it's been a while since I touched AMD and looked at VRR under Vulkan. But that requires you putting it to a DXGI interface. I think that some drivers may have that configured by default. But basically, it's not running DirectX. And Windows only really is expecting DirectX window panes, right? So there's hacks in the driver to make VRR work properly with it these days. And that might have been what we've been seeing. And as we know, FSR3, if you're in the no man's land, it's going to act very much so VSync-like if you don't have VRR. Yep. So maybe that's what we're seeing. Even if you do,
there's no guarantees. Just saying.
Yeah. But that's what it looked like. So when we turned it off, we got normal VRR play, and it was like 50, but I was just turning the camera smoothly. It looked really good, actually. So
Yep. I guess we're going to talk a bit more about Doom: The Dark Ages further on in this direct, but Gears Reloaded, I also gave that a quick go, but it just had this weird intermediate stutter. Not sure whether it was a sort of traversal or whatever, but that was odd. So I think, it was in terms of the demonstration, I think it could have been better. I think the hardware, though, is first class in terms of form factor. Screen's not bad. I mean, I believe it's the X is getting the same screen that the original Ally had. I don't really have, maybe I've just been conditioned by poor screens with the Switch 2, but it certainly looked a lot better than that. It was okay. I thought it was pretty good. I want to talk about some of the features here, though, because, well, we couldn't actually see them. And it turns out that, this does seem to be launching as a sort of work in progress product. Auto SR is basically, they're going to be using the MPU on the Z2 Extreme to basically do a machine learning based upscale, a post process almost. So you can check out our video on Auto SR based on the Qualcomm version of it, but I understand this is essentially, to all intents and purposes, Auto SR 2.0. It will have improvements over what we saw on the Qualcomm SoC. There will be improvements there, and it had to essentially be refactored to work with an AMD NPU. So that kind of makes sense, right? It's not going to be there at launch, though. That's something else. It's like another jam tomorrow scenario, which, I was a bit disappointed by that. I do want to talk about something you brought up, John, which is the whole concept of whether this is an Xbox or not. And it kind of ties into this thing that Microsoft is describing as the Xbox handheld compatibility program. This is actually their version, to all intents and purposes, of the Steam Deck verified program, which is still so opaque. I don't really know what it is. I guess it's just like you're supposed to get a playable experience of it. Xbox is actually, to their credit, being a bit more transparent about what it actually means. And they've got basically 2 badges, handheld optimized for plug-and-play titles, mostly compatible for games needing minor tweaks. There's a Windows performance fit indicator that basically predicts frame rates of being like above 30 or above 60 frames per second, which all sounds good. And I think it might be Windows Store only to begin with. I'd need to check on that. But, the idea is basically that you're going to be able to know whether the game is going to run well on the unit or not. This leads me on to some questions I asked to Microsoft, which is essentially, okay, so you've got this rating system, but, to be an Xbox, fundamentally, it's got to be plug and play, right? And so when you load the game, you essentially want the settings that Microsoft tested to determine those ratings to be auto-loaded into the game. But apparently that doesn't happen. So this is part of my problem that I've got at the moment. I don't have a problem with the hardware. I think the interface shows much promise. But the whole concept of an Xbox is essentially that it is plug and play, that you download a game, you press play, you're up and running, and everything should be taken care of for you. You shouldn't really need to be going into settings menus unless you kind of want to. You want the best of both worlds here. And that's kind of my issue with it, is that there's going to be a lot of people loading up games on default settings, and they're not going to run well on what is still a resource-constrained device. I think there is going to be the expectation from developers to actually, automatically detect that it's running on a handheld.
Right.
That's fine. But first of all, there's got to be take-up of it. If it's not mandatory, then, is there going to be that take-up? And secondly, the whole concept of the PC platform, even the Xbox platform at this point, is that you've got titles that are going back several generations. So, what's going on there? You're not going to get those settings retrofitted. I don't think it's an impossible ask because, GeForce Experience, as it used to be, would provide what it considers to be optimized settings. Whether they were or not, I don't know. But the point is that there's this...
Right.
Microsoft is saying that they've tested however many titles. I think it's up to 1,800. But, the user's got to have access to the fruits of that knowledge, I think. And that's got to manifest in an experience that's actually rated in the way Microsoft has rated it. And I'm not sure that's going to happen there.
Right.
Yeah. So let's go back to, obviously you didn't go hands-on with the Ally, John, but from everything you've heard, is it an Xbox or is it a PC or is it a hybrid?
I was actually watching through a bunch of videos as well, showing off the interface, showing games running. I'm going to say it's not really an Xbox in the traditional sense, but it might be an Xbox in the new Microsoft definition of Xbox. Right?
Isn't that convenient?
I think they're just fundamentally shifting what it is. But frankly, what I'm seeing so far, I think it's promising. The hardware looks cool. I actually like what they're doing with the interface, but it seems to have an issue that has long persisted with Windows, right? Where let's say you have a cool tablet device, or you have a special looking laptop, the hardware looks amazing, and you get it, and it always has this feeling. I know you know what I mean, Alex, where it's oh, you got Windows, and then you get this other thing layered on top of Windows.
Yeah.
And it feels like you're just like hacking in something like a new interface and new features. Whereas like you look at, and I'm not saying it needs to be like this, but you look at something like the iPad or even the Steam Deck or any of those types of devices, those operating systems feel custom built to support that type of hardware. Like it exposes a lot of hardware functions in a way that's really convenient and nice. Like, of course, in the Steam Deck, being able to bring up that side pane menu anytime, adjusting scaling, frame rate stuff. You can do so many things just from that little side panel, which allows you to get a very good experience out of games with very little like fuss. And that is something with that hardware integration. And this is what I was kind of hoping they would do, rather than just layering in new interface stuff on top of kind of existing Windows, which is what it looks like. I was hoping that they would essentially build, and maybe they still will, like essentially a gaming OS that's Windows based, can run Windows software, but first and foremost is about the gaming experience. And then they would apply this across a range of hardware. And the idea would be that you got to make this at least as plug and play and smooth as the Steam Deck, SteamOS, right? I think SteamOS basically set like the minimum that you really need to be at. It's not all the way the console, right? Consoles are still even more plug and play friendly, but the Steam Deck really strikes this brilliant balance between offering freedom and yet a very polished gaming experience. And they can still get there because, like you said, this is very much just an early product, and it's interesting. But taking like working with an existing partner to like make a new device and then layering and stuff, like when you're mentioning stuff like Armory Crate, I'm just like rolling my eyes at this. It's like, no, this should not. Right. It's fine, but you don't want something like this as part of what should be a bespoke piece of hardware.
I get what you're saying. It should all be handled exactly as I said. It should all be part of the Xbox package, right? I get what you're saying. I do think it does. It does boot into this interface. There's minimal access to. There's minimal visibility to the standard Windows.
I know, but it just feels like, remember Windows 8 era when you could boot to the tile menu instead, but you
mean the Metro interface.
The Metro interface.
What is that name anyway?
There's that. Actually, the Xbox requirement stuff reminded me of the Windows Vista era where Microsoft had that PC. Remember the score system?
Well, they even had actually.
They actually had a gaming like menu you could open up. You just click games, and all your games had these like nice huge icons in there, and everything actually felt like they were moving in a pretty cool direction, and they just scrapped it all and went Metro. I don't know, man. So I think there's a lot of potential here.
There is, but it's I agree. I mean, I did speak to the Xbox team and Asus. They basically were holding briefings, and the intent is there to basically make this like a proper Xbox machine, right? The question is really how far can they go and how quickly can they go? I mean, it's disappointing that there are features that I really wanted to see that could really sort of make this device stand out, but it's kind of like, okay, it's coming next year. Auto SR, for example, I think is going to be quite an interesting experience on a handheld based on what I saw with the Qualcomm version of it. But it does seem to be a lot of stuff that, yes, they're looking into it. For example, there is the sense that there's almost a retrograde step here because, let's be honest, the Series X and S front end actually was really good and had some really great features.
I agree. I feel like they should have just built. I mean, they could have built on that.
Quick Resume, for example. Quick Resume is would be really good for PC. So I did ask, are you going to bring Quick Resume to Xbox PC? It's like, yes, but we want to do it. So in the short term, the answer's kind of like effectively no, because it's basically a nice to have feature when they've got a whole bunch of critical milestones they need to meet, which I don't think they have yet. So that's kind of like the essence of it. There's still so much to work.
So Rich. You can drop out to the desktop that they show, right?
Yeah.
And I will say you can do this on the Steam Deck with the Linux desktop as well. But one thing the Steam Deck still has going for it that none of these other handhelds seems to have, they may look ugly, but those little trackpads on the Steam Deck
are
useful. Incredible.
Yeah, that's all.
They actually make mouse navigation viable in a way that's not the case when you just have analog sticks.
Yeah, they've tried their best there. The analog sticks were never able to do that without sort of intervention before in the past. Oh. So that's a good thing. But, again, some crucial things here. On the plus side, it does appear that there have been power optimization, so you do actually get decent battery life. Again, that's all going to come out when the reviews happen as to the extent to which they've been able to make that happen. Sleep, though, I don't know. Is that going to work properly? The Forks actually asked some questions of Microsoft on that and wasn't particularly satisfied by the answers there. I mean, putting a handheld to sleep is actually crucial base functionality there.
Extremely crucial.
So that's a bit of a concern. Performance, let's talk about this. I don't like what they're saying about the non-X versus the X unit. They're basically... It's the same error that they made with Series S and X, which is to say, okay, the Series S is our 1440p machine and our Series X is our 4K machine. That hasn't been borne out by actual games. And they're saying with the Ally that it's like, okay, the non-X Ally is a 720p machine and the Ally X is a 1080p machine. And that's not going to happen because every game has a different performance requirement. You can't make those claims. Because, one game, you said it yourself, Alex, we had Doom the Dark Ages running at 50 frames per second on the Ally X, and Clair Obscur was more like 30, right? And, so obviously different games have different requirements, which means that there is inevitably going to be some points where it's going to make a lot more sense on your Ally X to reduce the output resolution to 900p. Or even 720p on some really challenging games. So where does that leave the non-X Ally? And the answer is, well, effectively it's got horsepower in the same area as the Steam Deck, and that's not going to be good enough for a range of games. And I asked Microsoft about this because, I'm not particularly impressed by that sort of that sort of way of selling the two units. And they basically said, well, basically you're going to be paying X amount of money for one level of performance and, Y amount of money for an improved level of performance. And, the whole 720p, 1080p thing, that's not the right way to market it, I don't think, because there are going to be games on that non-X Ally that are just not going to be able to produce a good experience. And that's not great for a new machine that's effectively running with a revised version of a processor that came out with Steam Deck in 2022. And this is coming out at the end of 2025. So, pricing as well. These are two ways you can look at the $900 for the Ally X, which is to say, compared to equivalent devices using equivalent silicon to the Z2 Extreme, it's a good price. But compared to the comparative performance offered by the standard Ally and especially the Ally X, which basically solves the memory problems that the Ally had, you're effectively paying a huge amount more money for an iterative bump in performance. So yeah, I don't really know how this is all going to shake out. I heard an interesting thing from Chris String from the Games Business, because we had a chat about this for the Games Business. And his contention is this: it doesn't matter that the more expensive Ally probably won't, the more expensive Ally probably won't sell a huge amount of units, because it's all about hours played. And basically the most committed gamers are going to be buying the Ally X, and they're going to be spending a lot of hours on that, and they expect within those hours, for there to be a certain degree of monetization. So it will be successful by Microsoft's internal metrics, but in terms of the traditional metrics by which we consider a machine to be successful or not, if it doesn't sell a huge amount, Microsoft probably won't be too concerned about that. A $900 console, would be ludicrous. And yet here we are, which again says to me that this is effectively a PC, and similar to other handheld PCs, more of a niche market. John, what do you make of that?
Thinking about it for me, it's this weird rollout strategy where they say, oh, this is just the beginning of the generation. And I kind of wanted to ask you about this, what you think. Like, Do you think it makes sense to go with this sort of strategy of slowly rolling out these different kind of split hardware platforms in this way, slowly building up to something? Or do you think it would have made more sense to like essentially get all their ducks in a row and come out in a more big, bold way with like a very clear strategy of like, this is what we're doing. This is the type of hardware we're releasing. This is how our software is going. I don't want to say it's exactly the same, but more like something Apple would do, right? In a way where it all feels very unified. Like people always joke about features that Apple adds to their products. Like, oh, I've had that on Android for years, right? But the reason they say that is because of the way Android is kind of built and rolled out, is that it all feels like this like staggered kind of thing where you're just kind of bolting things on and stuff's coming in slowly, and they don't necessarily make as big a deal out of it as they perhaps could, where, you know, Apple will roll all these things up into one thing and then execute it perfectly, usually, and then present it to the audience in a way that gets people excited. And I feel like Microsoft's missing that, like, that key element of presenting all of this in a way that gets the users excited.
Yeah, I mean, I agree entirely. The other thing that really concerns me is the fact that it is using established technologies. You know, they could make us, you know, if the rumors are true, obviously the next generation Xbox is going to be using next generation components from AMD, not older ones or existing ones. And Sony, if the rumors are true, handheld and full console, again, based on the same architecture, very forward-looking architectures based on machine learning and improved ray tracing support, which isn't in this unit, which isn't in the Ally X, and especially not the base Ally. So it seems to me that Microsoft is more moving towards embracing PC, not just the forward-looking aspects of PC, but basically that there's this massive array of devices out there on PC, which games developers are kind of having to accommodate. It does feel as though it's come maybe a bit too soon, but at the same time, I still think there's so much work to do on Windows as a platform that they need some sort of frontier device to get out there.
Sure. This could be that.
So that's kind of the way I see it.
One more thing I was thinking about from the hardware design is, I kind of wish they had leveraged their experience with the Surface products, because I feel like Microsoft Surface products, like the physical design of those units, is second only to something like Apple. Like they really make these really sleek looking pieces of equipment, and I feel like that also plays a role. Whether we think it's important or not, but like I think having something that's like a really eye-catching design would have been awesome here for like this whole rollout, and it's something that the Surface team could absolutely have delivered, I think.
Yeah, I think essentially they went for an established partner that could deliver the product that, you know, and has some traction already. The problem, I think, when you're moving into the market for the first time is that your first generation product is always a bit lacking. And that especially is true for the original Surface, come to think of it. However,
not true for the original Xbox, though. That was pretty sweet.
I think, you know,
it was unique.
Going with Asus, they've basically able to tap into the experience that Asus has had with essentially 2 generations of handheld, and this is the third.
True.
So I think that's probably quite a good bet for them. Let's take some supporter questions, actually. Jiminy the 26th asks, good morning, afternoon, or night. Just cover all the bases. I'll keep this one short and simple. Is the Xbox Ally interesting? Is this Xbox quote-unquote dipping their toes rather than jumping into the pool? Hope Richard got better! ! I like that. Still a bit croaky, but doing all right. Is the Xbox Ally interesting? I mean, it's interesting, but I'm just not sure I'd spend $900 on it. And I do think Microsoft is... I don't think they're sort of dipping their toes. They're sort of, if you want to continue the sort of analogy, they're sort of continuing to slowly submerge.
Yeah. Starting
with the dipping of the toes. This question from Spodlude. Hello, Richard. I hope you're feeling better. As a ROG Ally X owner, one of my biggest frustrations is the lack of reliable sleep functionality. I hear the new ROG Xbox Ally continues this omission. Is Microsoft rushing this product when it lacks basic features in this regard? I understand it with the original ROG, which is just a handheld PC, but to attach the Xbox name to a product that lacks such a basic feature seems to me as though it could tarnish the brand. What are your thoughts on sleep-wake? Cheers. I think we've covered that already. I think this is one of the crucial foundational elements of a handheld device that needed to be comprehensively sorted. And I was looking for positive messaging from Microsoft to say, hey, look, we've got this. Don't worry, guys. And it doesn't really, unfortunately. So based on, what we saw at Gamescom. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there. I think ultimately my sort of final takeaway is I think we're going to get a really good PC handheld out of this. And it will be a handheld that evolves over time and gets better, gets new features, will further distinguish itself from other PC handhelds. I'm just still concerned about this core concept of what an Xbox actually is, which is to say it's an accessible way to play games. How accessible is this? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Any final thoughts there, Alex?
Well, for me, I think Microsoft doing it slowly is just a resources thing. Perhaps it takes a while to roll these things out, and they want to get there quicker because of feedback. Microsoft is kind of, I don't want to say they've left Q&A to the users over the years, but they kind of have in terms of how they take feedback on for Windows. And they've kind of done some reversals with Windows, as well as, changing features in Windows based upon user feedback. And I think that's kind of what we're going to see here, where over time the device is going to change based upon the people who are reviewing it and the way users kind of react to it. And that's maybe a positive thing. But in the middle period, it'll be less positive when the device is not fully featured. For me personally, I actually don't give a damn about the device. I just want to see what they use this device for to change Windows dramatically, because Windows is in dire need of that. And this device is kind of like their spearhead into the initial push, at least, for changing Windows for the better.
Mm-hmm. Okay. With that, let's move on. Okay, interesting story coming up here. Obviously, there's been I don't know what you'd describe it, Alex, perhaps a triple whammy of poor Unreal Engine 5 releases in terms of PC. We started with Wu Chang Fallen Feathers. Then we had Mafia, the old country.
Mafia.
Yes, Mafia. John. And it's kind of culminated.
How else do you pronounce that? It's Mafia. I don't understand. What's the problem?
Well, because in English it's Mafia.
That's what.
Yeah,
but it's an Italian word. Whatever. Who knows?
Anyway, it culminated in obviously Metal Gear Solid Delta, where let's just say that performance was not where we hoped it would be. Basically, a lot of people blaming the engine, Unreal Engine 5, and Tim Sweeney has come up with some comments. I'm just going to quote him here. The main cause is the order of development. Many studios build for top-tier hardware first and leave optimization and low-spec testing for the end. Ideally, optimization should begin early before full content rollout. And apparently Epic is working on solutions to help with that. We're doing two things: strengthening engine support with more automated optimization across devices and expanding developer education so quote-unquote optimize early becomes standard practice. If needed, our engineers can step in. I'm sure you've got a lot to talk about with that one, Alex, but John, what do you make of this?
Well, actually, I mean, the way his actual statement there is pretty on point, I would say, and largely aligns with what a lot of top tier developers do anyway, is you want to target sort of like your lower spec initially. Even if you're going for higher end features, if you're really serious about maintaining your frame rate, you need to be thinking about the lower spec hardware from the beginning. I mean, this is like the secret to so many games. Obviously we heard about things like even simple ones, like remember when Playtonic got the ukulele, the second game running on Switch 1 at 60 FPS.
Yeah.
Like that Switch 1 was their target platform for that. But I'm not saying always build in that way. There's other things as well, like keeping shader permutations in check. There's just a lot of things about building it that you have to be very conscious of from the very beginning, because a lot of this stuff cannot be put back in the bottle, so to speak, right? And I think that's been one of the problems with Unreal over the years, is that it sort of markets itself as this like tool that's like offers full freedom to artists to do whatever they want. But if you're with an inexperienced team or a team not properly reining that stuff in, it can lead to major issues down the line.
Right. Yeah.
And, but I mean, ultimately, a lot of that does still fall, obviously, on the development practices. That said, there are some things with Unreal that I think Alex is going to touch on that could potentially be better. And this is a similar complaint with Unity as well, where there's certain things about the way the engine works that if you're not careful of, or even something, sometimes you can't even dodge these pitfalls. Some of this stuff is inherent. So, Alex, why don't you get into some of this for us, actually?
I'd love to. So I think every single thing that Tim said is technically right, but it's ignoring some things, kind of like when you see a statement put out after a game releases and it's garbage, and the developer's like, some configurations, they put out the tweet that says like some configurations are experiencing this issue, when we know at DF that every configuration is experiencing this issue, but it's a nice way to deflect to the user. And here there's a bit of deflection to say, actually, it's low-end devices that are the problem, and developers' way they target low-end devices over the period of their production. When we know that a number of Unreal Engine 5 issues affect all configurations, so they couldn't optimize around it, kind of an issue. And I would really like to just call out like traversal stutter, where we know that at least from Unreal Engine 5.0 to roughly 5.5, and then now moving on to 5.6, it still actually isn't fixed at all in terms of how the engine is. The engine advertised itself with its demos as a large open world sim capable engine. But as soon as you started going into those open worlds and you go across the boundaries between world cells and actors are instantiated on the other side as full actors, then as the default engine allows you to do and tells you to do essentially with their demos, that causes massive frame time spikes. And when that happens, it's really not so much so the fault of the developer in that point, I would say, as rather the default engine feature really actually does have problematic performance. And only now with 5.4 and above, 5.5, 5.6, are they starting to rein that in by making the engine in itself on the RHI more multi-threaded, so that the size of the spike becomes smaller and smaller over time. And they're introducing things like the fast geometry plugin, which is still in experimental phase, to allow for lightweight actors to be streamed in and lightweight actors to exist in a way that the engine default supports. Otherwise, beforehand, a developer would actually have to make their own version of this, which is what CDPR did. They created the fast geometry idea, kind of, which other developers were maybe doing custom, but the default engine itself didn't provide that functionality. So if you did use the default engine for the default stuff it was designed around, it would actually be stuttering. And the same thing applies as well to the shader permutation problem, which Sean talked about. For the longest period of time, basically 5.3, 5.4, up until then, the engine actually had an incomplete and improper way to perhaps take care of the shader compilation problem for developers using it. It would be naturally incomplete unless you did custom stuff with it. And that is actually kind of bad design that was just kind of left over for a long period of time until I think a lot of people complained about it from the developer's perspective and from the consumer perspective. That pushed Epic into like full gear to fix it. And they brought in some very specific people to work on it, and they did a good job of it. But I would say, just saying, I think the thing that Tim said there is very true for a lot of games and a lot of games we've seen, but also there are core issues with the engine that still haven't been fully solved. And the users bear the brunt of it in the end in regards to frame time stability. And, kind of semi-recently, if a game was using things like VSMs and foliage, it didn't really work out too well from a GPU performance perspective. And it's only after they got like nanite foliage in with like full VSM support that we started to see that actually being a viable design for games. Whereas otherwise beforehand, you could get the visuals you wanted on screen, but the cost would have been extreme. Which you kind of see in earlier 5.0 to 5.4 game releases, which is the the bulk of them. Like, I don't know what we're looking at there with MGS Delta, but like you can literally on a RTX 4060, you can turn off all shadows, you can turn off all lumen, and you're still below sub 60 FPS. You're like maybe like 50 something at 1080p on a RTX 4060. No, like no lighting and no shadows, and it just looks like worse than a PS2 game, and you're still sub 60 just because of the geometry shading that's going on.
Is it not simply the case that, that kind of scenario does seem to be what Tim Sweeney is talking about, where there's inexplicable performance problems with a certain title and probably should have been more expertly budgeted by the developer during development?
I mean, I agree with it, but I also think like that game, like I can't purport too much, but to say the least, I mean, yes, but to say the least, at the same time, like vegetation and VSMs and just vegetation shading in general for the longest period of time, if you were to force that into Nanite, would have been pretty expensive in a scene. And if a game is using a lot of those things, even for these small little worlds, like, have we really seen a lot of jungle UE5 games? Have we seen a lot of
that's
jungle
still
UE5
a development
games?
choice though, right?
Yeah, of course, but
there's other ways they could do it.
With using UE5, maybe not. Maybe a different engine they could, but like if you want to use Nanite and you want to use foliage,
right? But you don't have to use Nanite. Is what I'm saying.
So is the
Alex? Then you don't get the engine features, right?
Is the contention
what I mean?
then that the content type of Metal Gear Solid Delta is not a great fit for the fundamentals of Unreal Engine 5? I mean, it's really difficult to actually come to a conclusion as to why performance isn't where we kind of think it should be.
I mean, this is like totally theory crafting territory. Some aspects of something like Metal Gear Solid 5 Delta, I'd say, are like really tailored for Unreal Engine 5. It sucks at open worlds currently, like with the earlier engine versions. The game splits up everything with loading screens. It's actually amazing for that aspect. But the amount of like foliage in the scenes, I actually think it's like really kneecapping the game's GPU performance. But yeah, that only really until this version 5. Whatever, it's only out right now with the experimental vegetation. That's only where like nanite vegetation got like super performant.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay.
The engine's
they could
evolving
have just done
constantly.
it old school style, like the PS2 version.
Yeah, right.
Just model it all out.
Yeah, why,
but
they could have also done that too. Like we've seen games that use vegetation on Unreal Engine 5, but they've also come with like serious compromises, like Stalker, for example, where they had to like turn off a lot of the shadows on them, as well as not have them be covered by nanite in an earlier engine build. So I mean, there's just a lot going on there. I don't want to. It's a bad release in general for a lot of reasons, but I do think we can't deflect from the issues that. Otherwise, what was the difference between 5.0 and 5.6? It was obviously Epic saw that there were issues with the engine and continues working on it. You're deflecting from all that work otherwise that they did to make it better. So. Yeah, absolutely. It's not all the developers.
I mean, it does feel like with the way Unreal Engine is, if you're in development, upgrading engine versions can be very time consuming and expensive, obviously. And there's an argument to be made that when Unreal Engine 5 hit, it wasn't really optimal yet. So all those new features they offered were still basically in development and largely very slow. So if you were one of the earlier developers getting in, and we've been seeing these games coming out, building on that kind of technology, then a lot of the decisions you would have had to make at the time would have been due to where Unreal Engine was at the time. And you may not have the ability, budget, whatever, to like bring it up to the newest iteration. And even if you could, just ripping things out and changing the way you do things is also time consuming and expensive. So I think UE5's features will become more performant, and they already have, but actually seeing that in big games, it's going to take more time, and it's definitely not a trivial thing. So.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I mean, what can I say? There's this sort of perception that Unreal Engine just takes care of everything for you, but that's just not the way game engines work. I particularly like the idea that, you've got an Unreal Engine project. It's just like, okay, export Series S version, export PS5 version, export PC version. Doesn't quite work like that. Anyway. I'm sure this story is going to run and run with each and every Unreal Engine title that appears, which doesn't live up to expectations. I think it is fair to say, though, that we are aware that there is going to be some pretty good stuff coming. Anyway, let's move on. Alex, I'm just going to hand this one over to you because we've got some presentations that you're very interested in telling the audience about. So have at it.
Okay, yeah, Rich. SIGGRAPH happened. The Advances in Real-Time Rendering series, like it does every year for a good long time now. Year to year, there's kind of always like themes. And one of the themes this year kind of seems to be like stochastic techniques, basically leveraging a certain level of randomness to accelerate rendering or accelerate quality, variety of things like that. And as a big part of that, we saw it, I forget the exact date of it. It was earlier this year, the Mega Lights demo from Epic running on a base PlayStation 5.
Right.
And the idea was, unlike where Lumen is using ray tracing, hardware ray tracing, to accelerate and produce indirect lighting, Mega Lights is going to take over and use ray tracing to do direct lighting and direct shadows. Kind of like you would see in a path trace title on PC. That's kind of been one of the larger distinctions for path trace titles on PC, big quotes there, is that direct lighting and indirect lighting are done that way. And this is a big deal because for something like the PlayStation 5, doing all that ray tracing on an RDNA 2 GPU, you got to wonder, how are they going to do it? Can it do it? Why do this in the first place, right? Like, why? This is what the presentation from the two engineers kind of goes over: the why and the how and where we want to take this in the future. And I'm not going to go over all of it because it's very long and very detailed. It's brilliant, actually. It's a wonderful presentation. But the kind of why has to do with scaling in general. You just have to think about it with rasterized lighting. The cost of shading is going to be expensive in its own right. But the cost of getting shadowed lights is also very expensive in its own right, because from each shadow casting light in the world, you're re-rendering the world from the light's perspective to a certain degree. Yes, there's culling and everything happening to help reduce some of that, but you're still paying that cost. And then that doesn't scale with many shadow casting lights. Each time you put a new one in the scene is getting quite a lot more expensive because you're re-rendering the whole world from that perspective. With ray tracing, you're only sampling from the pixel's perspective, a visibility ray to figure out what's happening. And it scales a lot better with many more lights because you essentially don't have to re-render the world each time you're doing that. That is a great thing. But ray tracing is super expensive for a lot of reasons on the current gen consoles and even on PC. So they had to come up with a way to essentially get the equivalent of restir direct lighting, like we've seen on PC, running on console. And they had a certain prerequisites to allow that to be the case. With restir on PC, reservoir sampling, it requires essentially multiple rays per pixel to start having a quality threshold that is acceptable and good. For them, that is way too high. It was like 2 to 4 rays per pixel. They only were going to allow themselves 1 ray per pixel for this stuff at 1080p, because that's their target internal resolution there on the PlayStation 5 for this thing. And they had to come up with some very specific stuff that is all laid out in the presentation. I don't want to paraphrase it because they'll do it better than I would, to allow that to be the case. And it actually runs pretty well. I think they found that it's like direct lighting from everything. Direct lighting and shadowing is like around 5+ milliseconds on a PlayStation 5. And it's fully replacing the kind of like raster portion that would have been doing that beforehand. Or the compute portion that would have been doing that beforehand. So it was actually a great win. But they talk about the struggles about what this means, as well as the benefits. So another benefit, other than getting a lot more shadow casting lights, is you get a kind of free different styles of lights. You get area lights. when I talked with the developers of Industria 2, they said, actually, we're using area lights all over the place here to fake skylighting, because skylighting from Lumen isn't good enough for indoor areas a lot of the time, even with hardware Lumen. So they would put in like big grayish, bluish area lights in the areas where there would be openings. And then those would get really nice tight shadows, kind of faking the look of skylight coming in from outside. Really cool stuff. So they talk about how with this, artists can now place many more lights that are shadow casting and new types of lights. And they kind of, as a result of this workflow existing developers would be able to, they kind of had like a freedom allowed, and they would start placing many more new types of light configurations that the programmers never really even thought of. And it was actually really cheap, a flat cost, because you are always going to be doing roughly the same amount of rays per pixel each frame. So it's like a flatter cost to lighting that they really liked. But some of the challenges they describe are like endemic to the issue, and they have to figure out ways to solve them in the future. Right now, this is like a 30 FPS thing, obviously. A lot of games aren't targeting 30. Another thing is that you have to scale down to something like Series S. This is targeting Xbox Series X, PlayStation 5, potentially, like a mid to upper end PCs. There's handhelds out there now. Like, how do you get this to run on a handheld?
Well, you just do the Series S approach like Wukong.
Yeah, just cut out all the lighting.
Turn it all off.
Turn it all off. They also talk about how, they have to still rely on VSMs to a certain degree for things like directional, like large-scale directional lights, potentially for performance reasons, because there's just not a big enough ray budget for it and denoising budget for it. And they also describe how Unreal Engine itself and the APIs that exist need to make this better from a geometry perspective, because right now they're still using the proxy geometry, which means if you were to look, a lot of the shadows actually have the wrong silhouette. And they try and fix that for certain cases using screen space shadows and some other like offsets to make it less obvious. But with certain lighting styles and objects, it's just going to be painfully obvious. And it's actually kind of non-viable for those scenes. And they're very open about that. And so they need a way to have it so that nanite virtual geometry is at least 1-to-1 for silhouettes in the future. But the current gen consoles don't have the geometry performance for that on the ray tracing side. And also the API currently doesn't exist in some sort of agnostic way across all platforms. We have Mega Geometry coming out, but we need a way to actually make the BVH build reasonable. And that's like targeting future hardware, I believe, when they kind of describe that at the end. But in general, a really amazing presentation that has some great numbers in it and some great surprises about things they learned during the process, like how Restir, for example, they tried ideas of Restir, but it creates like an ordered grid noise into it to a certain degree, or like an ordered noise. I wouldn't say grid, or ordered noise that denoisers can pick up on, and they actually make denoiser results worse, which is kind of cool. Really cool presentation. Everyone should, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, it's going to be the future of whatever UE5 does for next gen. Like PlayStation 6 titles will probably use this technology as a base. So
that was going to be my point. Yeah. I think that John was going to make the same point, that this feels like laying the groundwork for something that's going to be happening more prolifically going into an era where we've got more capable hardware.
Exactly.
And in a world where, let's consider, it's going to be pretty obvious at this point that next generation is going to be like super, super cross-gen in a way that, at that point, it's going to be okay not to be able to have features on Series S, or just to jettison the Series S completely. And
open the airlock, Rich.
Well,
do it.
I think it's basically got to happen at some point, right? You've got to let go of a much lower performing platform at some point and introduce a new baseline. And at that point, I suspect it probably will be PlayStation 5, which is why this is the target for this at 30 frames per second, because that's your kind of baseline, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In a way, this kind of reminds me of 2008 when we first started seeing a shift towards a deferred rendering, where some developers did it really well. Like obviously, Guerrilla's work on that they really laid a lot of groundwork there. It looked great, ran great, but a lot of other developers jumped on board with that, and that became sort of like the building blocks for engines going forward. But that generation of consoles, while capable of doing it, they weren't great at it. And a lot of examples of like engines that shifted to deferred rendering, they ran pretty bad. I mean, I think Capcom's was one of the worst examples of this, where MT Framework was really optimized, ran great. Then they started doing everything with deferred rendering to get all the lights and the benefits of like being able to throw on all those lights primarily, and the performance suffered a lot. But it was very important for work going forward, right?
Yeah, it was. And I do also feel the same way here, where this idea is like a proving ground for the next gen and the current gen consoles. While they did show that demo running it, you know, they openly say like, you know, this is the performance target. And actually it doesn't work for all these cases because there's just not enough power to make it work for these cases at the moment. So
with Crysis 2, we have nothing below 30 FPS.
Yeah, I get some of those feelings too. Do you remember those original demos? They're running at like 15 to 20 FPS. I saw them. I saw you ship on.
That was funny.
The next SIGGRAPH presentation, there's also others that I want to talk about maybe next week, but they haven't posted all their details yet. But the next one that I want to talk about is the IdTech one.
Oh yeah, this is a good one.
Tiago Souza. So fast as hell. They always have some great name for all these IdTech presentations. And this one's about their usage of ray trace global illumination. And why I think this is important is because you go on the internet and you see a lot of people saying Doom Eternal looked better, or you say a lot of people like Doom Eternal looked like this. Why couldn't Doom the Dark Ages just use their tech and not use ray tracing? This entire presentation here talks about why that's such a bad idea. The first part of it is basically talking about why switching to RTGI in the first place. And they go over the previous pipeline that existed to do direct and indirect lighting, by the way, for Doom Eternal. And they describe essentially for the Doom Eternal maps, you know, like a large path tracer running in a cloud and a number of PCs. And it already had a pretty hardcore compute time for those smaller Doom Eternal maps, as well as the compute time is not the only issue, but iteration time as a result, because you change something in a level, especially towards the end of development, you're going to have to recompute all that lighting to see what's happening. And so that was already like a big problem in the last project. Then for the Doom, the Dark Ages maps, they have a lot more dynamic objects in it. They have a much larger size, more geometry. It's like 4 to 10 times depending upon the map. And then Tiago very nicely here gave us some great numbers as to what if they were to use Doom Eternal's pipeline in Doom the Dark Ages, what that would look like. So here on the slide is Oliver showing on screen right now, because Oliver's a real G. What if Doom the Dark Ages used the exact same older tech bits? Here they describe it would be on disk anywhere, depending upon the average level size, 44 to 110 gigabytes. 110 gigabytes potentially of just just baked lighting on disk. And it's not like full quality lighting, by the way. It's already half size.
That's the key, right? That's just the lighting data, not the game.
The network storage, that's less important for us as the consumers, but for them, that's like an upkeep cost. And it's constantly rebuilding if all the artists are touching levels. And then the turnaround time, the build time for all the levels, at the minimum 27 days. Max 68 days.
Okay.
I don't even know what you do at this point in time, because you would kind of have to be editing levels with incomplete and wrong lighting until the very end of the project when you say, okay, we have time to build, you know, like we have actually time to build here. And you could be having the case like with older games where they would ship either accidentally or on purpose levels with incomplete lighting. Like that happened in Mirror's Edge. I'm pretty sure it happens in Quake 2 for a number of levels that didn't.
It was actually Doom 2016 itself on PlayStation 4. There was a broken level in there where the light maps got messed up somehow, and it was broken for months before anybody actually realized, because it was way after the game came out. And it's just a tiny little thing changed and it broke all the light maps.
and they describe like a lot of things. Like if an artist pushes a build, what if it didn't finish because of a Windows update or something like that? Like this is like literal stuff that can happen that we don't see as a consumer, but it totally affects their development. So from our perspective as a consumer, they want to switch to ray tracing because one, it's going to produce visually better results, which they talk about in breadth during the thing. But they also like, do we really want to be downloading 110 gigabytes just of lighting data? I don't know. I probably don't want it at this point in time. From their perspective, it makes the game development within a short period of time actually possible. Otherwise, not possible. Game costs much more, comes out later, potentially is worse because they can't iterate it on as much. There's so many issues, so they have to switch to it. And I think that's an amazing thing that Tiago put in the presentation. So grateful for it. Kind of similar to the thing that we also saw in the Ubisoft presentation, but Ubisoft's world is much larger because it's a big open world. So the numbers there were even more insane.
Now, of course, there are arguments that this is necessary because of the type of game they decided to make, right? And some people will say, well, I prefer Doom Eternal, and which I get, actually, and Doom Eternal is incredible. But, artistically, they wanted to make this game with much larger maps, and the technology is what allowed them to do it. They could have made another game like Doom Eternal with the smaller scale, and I guess the old techniques would have still been viable, but essentially ray tracing opened the door to allow them to make the thing that they wanted to make.
I mean, yeah. I mean, so the thing is, they could have made another Doom Eternal, but then they would still be constrained by the tech that they had at the time.
Right.
That's just they could have also made Doom Eternal with RT lighting, and it would have came out much quicker. You know what I mean?
And I feel like as an id Software game, it is nice to see them pushing tech in this way. This is traditionally from the Carmack days to the Tiago days. It's always been about sort of like taking that leap and trying new technologies. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. But it's always interesting. And I think this was an important step forward and one of the fastest and best looking implementations of RTGI we've seen this whole generation. It really is fast as hell, I would argue, just as the title implies.
It's fast and stable. It doesn't seem to be very artifact ridden. That's a lot of the design there. You can read about the design of it. It's also really well done. The second part of the presentation that I just wanted to call out one little thing is that because we're starting to see more of it in technical presentations, is actually developers talking about console performance across the different things. Right. So there's a slide on here talking about the performance targets, not at a flat resolution for everything, because Series S is still listed there as 900p, and the PS5 Pro and the PC there are running at different resolutions, but we actually get to see the 4K twins, and in this case 1440p twins of Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5, and they actually have a breakdown of the various steps of the ray tracing pipeline and their individual costs. But like the cost that is actually the linear cost is interesting without async compute, but the async compute cost in the end is actually interesting because you see a roughly 10% Xbox Series X speed improvement over what the PlayStation 5 was. And that kind of calls back to even Tiago in the footnotes here does call it out as coming from that higher teraflop figure in the Xbox Series X. And I kind of feel like for those next generation techniques, that is when we should start seeing Xbox Series X, assuming parity in development time and resources, pulling ahead, because it has more shading power and things that cost shading should run faster on a bigger GPU. But it's interesting to see actually someone point this out in a presentation. The last time we saw something similar was the Assassin's Creed presentation, where they talked about cross-platform performance at the exact same resolution, where you actually got a sense like, oh, there are things that are way faster on this platform versus this platform. And I really like seeing that called out. I also like the fact that you can see just how, I mean, for the what they did with it, it's pretty good. But Series S is also just pretty darn slow.
I think something which is slightly curious, Alex, is that the Radiance cache and Irradiance volumes seem to be twice as fast on PS5 than they are on Series X.
Right. I could only begin to guess as why.
It's funny because the overall cost on PlayStation 5, which is borne out in the actual final game, is actually higher overall.
Right. I think the reasons for that is the radiance cache and irradiance volumes. So the world sampling should be the ray tracing step. That's the stuff that is going to be running through ray tracing accelerators, as well as using generic compute for all the stuff that, like BVH traversal, etc. So all of that. But the radiance cache itself should be a texture lookup and stuff like that, which is the area where we know that the PlayStation 5 has the edge due to its speed, essentially, how fast the individual CUs are running. So I think that's kind of, I would assume that's what you're seeing there. If you look at a step like denoising, which is a pure compute step, you can see that Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 have pretty different.
There's a huge gap between world sampling and PlayStation on Series X versus PS5, where the Series X is a lot faster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's like in the end, you have kind of different designs. I'd say like PS5's design is really good since how long it was. Oh my gosh, cross-gen. Like it's actually perfect for that, right? And then it still has like the room to breathe on top because they did support stuff like ray tracing. But then like Series X design, I think still proves itself like over time because it is focusing on the future of where GPUs are at least going in terms of compute, in terms of specialized units and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a pretty cool thing to see. But those were the two presentations I want to talk about. If some of the other presentations come online next week, I would love to talk about them as well there too.
Okay, good stuff. And with that, let's move on to our final news topic of the week. And again, I'm just going to hand this one over to John. The docket simply says ShaderGlass. So tell us more.
Yes. So there's a program called ShaderGlass from a developer called Mousimus. It's been around for a bit. The idea is essentially you run this and it sort of becomes like a window where you can apply different shaders, CRT shaders. You can change scaling, pixel size. But one of the coolest things about it has been it actually supports black frame insertion, right? You can just hit Control-Shift-G and it just full screens, and anything within your monitor it now has this applied. You can also put it into a specific window for it. But either way, the idea is that you're applying the stuff on top of the game that you're running. And the effect is very cool. I've used this a lot for things like side-scrolling games that are 60 hertz. If you have a monitor that doesn't have like black frame insertion or something built in, it's great for that. It's really, really good. But this week, they released a new alpha build of this. It's Alpha 3 specifically, where he has implemented Blurbuster's CRT beam simulator into ShaderGlass. So now you can essentially run this simulated CRT beam on top of your content. This is, again, it is designed for 60 hertz content primarily. But the higher your refresh rate, the better the results, right? The number of subframes you can use for this. But in the result, it does take some tweaking. There's still some issues I have with it. But when it's working well, it is honestly staggering to see this kind of motion clarity just work on a monitor like this. When it, it really does. And not only that, your eyes, you do detect like the actual little bit of like a scanline flicker, where you actually can feel like the drawing from the top corner to the bottom in a way. It's very interesting to see. Unfortunately, the problem with it right now is that it is expensive. Not that expensive, but it does have a performance sort of impact, right? There is a bit of a bottleneck there. So if you're running simpler games, you're running like say MAME, you're running like 2D games, older 3D games, it's no problem. But I was trying this with Metal Gear Solid 3 Delta, which is obviously a brand new, very heavy game. I'm able to lock that game to 60, but just barely on my system. And dropping ShaderGlass on top with the CRT simulator kind of pushes it over the edge. And so what you end up with is this sort of like desynchronization where it'll either flicker, flash. You can see the motion like losing this fluidity where it kind of looks stuttery at times. So like you get these pockets where it looks perfect, but then you see it kind of break. So unfortunately, it's not quite the panacea I was hoping for games like that. But it did get me thinking more about this concept and how much I would love to see vendors implement this at a driver level. Clearly, it can be done, right? Because the problem is a lot of most PC gaming monitors these days, especially with the shift towards high refresh rate as a focus, they've eliminated this. Either strobing, black frame insertion, all those features are increasingly uncommon on PC gaming monitors. Obviously, NVIDIA does have the Pulsar stuff, which seeks to solve this, but that's, again, just LCDs and just specific monitors. You need the hardware. I think a driver level implementation of what ShaderGlass is doing that can more easily work with the GPU and has perhaps a more like reasonable performance cost, or can like work better with the games in a way, if you will, would be so cool to see. And it would solve a lot of problems with motion clarity for so many different titles. And it's super cool. I was doing it at 300 hertz on this monitor here. I also tried it on a 480 hertz monitor. And yeah, when you're at 480 hertz and it's working correctly, it may as well just be, it's like basically perfect. It's honestly insane how clear it is. So I wanted to highlight this because this is a problem near and dear to my heart. I think when people complain about 60 FPS, and don't get me wrong, I love my frame rates over 60. I think it's very important and beneficial for PC games. But the problem with 60 is sample and hold. Sample and hold displays do a terrible job with 60 frames per second. They blur it, they smear it. The motion clarity is just not there. It's very ugly, I think, and I've always hated the way it looks. High refresh rates basically help mitigate this to some extent, which is why we've seen a rise in that over recent years. But 60 hertz can look amazing on a pulse type display. That's why 60 hertz looks great on a CRT and why I've been harping on it. But techniques like this allow us to reach that clarity on otherwise sample and hold displays. So come on, NVIDIA, AMD, like this is such a feature. Like if like, let's say like I would go to whichever board manufacturer or whichever chip manufacturer did this first, I would switch to their GPU in a heartbeat. That's what I'm saying. Right. I think it's so important. Motion clarity is like just top. It's what I strive. It's what I want from a display. And it's something that so many companies have struggled to deliver. And I never understood why it's just not given the importance it deserves. I guess NVIDIA has at least thought about it a bit more lately since they're developing this Pulsar stuff. But again, it's freaking LCD only. and you all know where I think LCDs belong.
Yeah,
I saw one in Cologne.
I just sort of picturing you entering like a hardware store with a gigantic sledgehammer, just finally letting out all of your fury, years worth of pent up LCD fury.
No, it's like that one scene in They
Maybe
Live,
Mr.
like,
Beast could facilitate this particular spectacle.
John entered the store with him.
I don't know what you think though, Alex. I mean, you've grown since embracing the CRT lifestyle. I think you've also kind of come to find what I'm saying is not so crazy after all.
No, it's not crazy at all. It's in fact really important. And I think John's idea of putting it on the driver level is a really good one. From an integration standpoint, NVIDIA is already manipulating the image post with a lot of stuff.
Yep.
They're using,
Of course, they just
HDR, et cetera,
they could stick it into the the Alt Z menu, whatever they call it, in the NVIDIA drivers, where you bring up like the list of effects,
the overlay,
like the overlay, RTX HDR, all that stuff.
Overlay.
Implement it there, guys. Come on, at the very least. Great.
I also think there's an argument, depending upon how expensive the monitor is, to be a monitor feature, which would be. I mean, it would take out the potential latency, GPU latency issue.
Dude, but monitor manufacturers
having a shader
don't
running
freaking care, dude. I spent $2,000 on this monitor and it's not even there.
I know.
And if you search around, like any of these high-end gaming monitors, like once they went to high refresh rate, they just dropped this feature like a hot rock.
Yeah, BFI was definitely less to go.
At least you can still get it on TVs.
Yeah, that's the true part. The one thing I was going to also say, like, another great reason for this to come into existence and be more ubiquitous is because the fact that CRTs are going to be dying and there's no replacement technology for them in the medium term. And it would be great if you could get extremely close to a CRT's properties, at least maybe one half of those properties, just by having an OLED display, a generic OLED display. And then it would make that retro market so much more enjoyable too, because a lot of people, the cost too, like you can find, like I'm very lucky that I found mine from people locally or semi-locally that were just like, these are old monitors, we got to get rid of them, right? Exactly. But a lot of them are like, this is a boutique retro dream monitor from 2005. It costs 350 euros, or like the FW900 that John has. This costs 16,000 euros. So like,
it's not quite that bad.
I've seen the prices. They are ridiculous.
It's not 16,000 euros.
It's at least 2 these days. 2
to 4 is what they often go for,
that is ridiculous.
Which sucks because they're old monitors, right? They rule, but like they're very old at this point, and like spending that much money on something that can break at any time.
It can break at any time. Yeah,
I'm still in tears over my XM29, that NEC XM29. It was so beautiful, and it lasted for 2 weeks. It pains me to even think about it, that it's still being worked on. But man, like CRTs, I love them, but they bring heartbreak, man. They bring heartbreak.
What was the issue in it, though, John? Just really quickly.
Something just failed on the deflection board. And because it's we're trying to figure out which component it is, and it's getting narrowed down, but actually, like, if you actually see, it's got like 10 circuit boards in there. It's so jammed, so difficult to work on. Like, it's an absolute nightmare compared to like a consumer style CRT, that the people helping me out, like, we're looking at it just like, Jesus, like there's so many freaking boards in here. Like, even just getting your hand in there to get the things out, like, it's insane.
Yeah.
So,
well, so close.
Well, I hear what you're saying. Facebook Marketplace, which is my go-to place for bargains, CRTs now are just being ruthlessly overpriced. Even the crappy ones.
I'm sorry, everyone.
Yeah, it's all our fault.
I feel like we contributed a little bit to this. But hey, Linus did it too.
Fair point. Many more views than ours. Cumulative damage of impact there.
Even though we were there first, and I've been beating this drum for years, but still.
We still need to do like a CRT video, sort of definitive CRT video. But we digress.
We digress.
I guess that's it for the news this week. Let's talk about supporter Q&A, where every week I ask our supporters to give us their comments on our various topics that we have up for discussion, along with, yes, their questions. We choose the best or other the ones we're best equipped to answer within the sort of time we've got available. I'm going to kick off with this one from Ryan Peters. I love it. Now that Microsoft is rolling out a fix for the hashtag StutterStruggle by shipping compiled shaders, exactly how much of the hashtag StutterStruggle would you say is Microsoft's fault in the first place? Let's just get straight down to it. We need to blame someone. Previously with DirectX 11 and earlier, shader compilation was hardly noticeable in many titles, but in modern games, doing that optimization work yourself is often error-prone or incomplete, as you've noticed over the years. As thankful as I am for Microsoft finally stepping in, I can't help but wonder if they could have done something much sooner before Valve embarrassed them on their own turf with SteamOS. Alex.
I mean, at the end of the day, they approved the API spec that was put forward by the vendors and agreed upon. So whoever was part of that consortium back then, I don't think Intel would have been at the table very much so, but definitely NVIDIA and AMD have some share of the blame there. I think the idea, though, of packaging so much state instead of having it be lighter weight was perhaps the biggest issue. Perhaps there could have been a lighter or a heavier, I'm saying it the wrong way, a heavier object that isn't so explicit, and as a result, we wouldn't have the same permutation hell that we have right now. But I do think that at the time when these things were devised, the idea of like ultra special shading and branching and all these things, like games were only just getting into the PBR era. And they were getting into more specialized forms of shading after a lot of much simpler things in the Xbox 360 era. We still didn't reach that maturity yet. And I think you could have maybe foreseen where it would all lead to, but I don't. I'm not sure if we would have, because at that point in time, you had to do something to bring down CPU cost. And maybe this wasn't one of the ways to do it. Actually, this is like a GPU thing too. But I also do think Microsoft, sure, they laid the foundation for where we are now. And maybe with hindsight, they probably should have not developed this the way it was. It should have been something different. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I mean, I'm just loving the question. It's like, okay, who's to blame? And from there, it's like, well, okay, let's punish them.
Let's punish them.
Bring them out, flog them. They need to be held accountable, like politicians. Mm-hmm. You can't vote out
politicians
Microsoft.
Aren't held accountable.
Any thoughts on this, John?
Well, I mean, I would say they have a good point. It does kind of. I mean, ultimately, everything we're seeing with this is just down to. I feel like a lot of this is legacy Windows and the way it's built up over the years, along with the changes and improvements made to hardware. And it's just kind of how everything sort of developed together. And Microsoft hasn't taken any specific steps to really solve this problem with DX12 and such. I mean, I'm sure there's been some, but it does kind of feel like,
oh yeah,
developers are just like left to their own devices, so to speak. And then they kind of just tried to do what they could. And I also feel like there was a time where things like stuttering was just kind of almost, I hate to say it, viewed as normal in PC games.
Yeah.
Right? Like it was never desirable, but that's just kind of how it was. And it always differed depending on the generation. Like in the 90s, you get hard disk related, like hard disk access stutter and things like that. Like, I mean, I remember playing Deus Ex, shooting a barrel and the whole thing would seize up for 5 seconds. You'd be like, man, I bet that was a cool explosion. But you never got to see it. There's too much, that kind of stuff. So, but it's true that during, DX9, DX11 era, even there was a nice sort of like combination workability between the GPU and the Windows side of things that kind of helped minimize this. And then once we went DX12, perhaps it wasn't as well thought out. Well,
yeah. I mean, DX12 also is like, everyone is now a graphics driver programmer as soon as DX12 comes out. And it's like, that's probably a bad idea if you just want to leave things to be like, if you want gaming to proliferate, it's like not everyone can afford them. Right?
Exactly. It's interesting. And there are power developers that love having certain additional options available to them, right? But not everyone is up to the task of that or wants to do it in the first place. And DX12 definitely made it a little more complicated.
Okay, fair enough. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Gimme More Frame Rate. Hi, gents. With recent RDNA 5 leaks suggesting AMD is finally preparing a serious high-end GPU push in late 26-27, potentially targeting 6090 class performance, do you think we're heading towards a more competitive landscape in the enthusiast segment? In the current gen, AMD largely ceded the top tier, while NVIDIA's Blackwell felt like a minimal effort to maintain dominance rather than push boundaries, but AMD seems to be closing the gap on software and AI features. Do you think NVIDIA will be forced to respond with meaningful performance and VRAM improvements rather than relying on DLSS feature marketing? And if AMD delivers a feature-rich, high-performance RDNA 5 lineup, could we finally see the kind of competition that will bring down pricing and pressure innovation across the board? I guess this is kind of like the sort of scenario which we kind of have that expectation level with every single generation. This one's RDNA 4 slightly different because basically AMD immediately communicated that they weren't going to be targeting the high end and they were going to be actually targeting the mid-range and lower, which I think is fair enough. But the latest rumors are suggesting some kind of mega die, which does look huge, with like a massive gap down towards what was then considered the mid-range. Again, I think that is a Moore's Law is dead leak. And again, we should stress single source with no corroboration at this point. But Alex, this sort of question, it is the sort of thing that does come up with every new generation, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is a little bit the AMD poison here for a lot of people who get their hopes up and then to be slightly dashed or just, not responded to. I think RDNA 4 is actually pretty good, though. Here, I would so much salt on this rumor because I don't want to say anything about it, but it would be a great thing to have happen. The only thing that I wouldn't like, Blackwell is Blackwell, but the way these teams are at least set up at NVIDIA and AMD is that they're going to, the guys who, and the people who are making the cool new features for a variety of the different things, like the hardware people, they're obviously working together to make sure this all works, but they're still going to be pushing in their own directions and advancing their research and creating features that maybe require hardware support or maybe don't. And I think we shouldn't, like the user, like the person here kind of describes, like instead of them leaning on DLSS innovations and maybe pushing in other areas, I think that stuff is all happening in parallel. So you would get your DLSS innovations at the same time as NVIDIA's market response, meaning that their GPU now has more memory. I don't think it's going to be like a push or pull one or the other because they have enough resources to do that. And I also think AMD at this moment in time, at least if they pull money from their CPU division, they have the resources to do that kind of a thing too. So I would say just because there could be a great response from an AMD on the top end doesn't mean that we would start seeing totally different style of marketing from NVIDIA, who says, screw DLSS this generation, we're not advancing it, we're just going to give you more, I don't know, shader units. I don't think that's the way it's going to work at all.
I think, I think the kind of reaction to Blackwell is behind some of this question. It's kind of like, well, NVIDIA didn't really push boundaries this generation, but that's kind of like a factor of the fact that they're using the same process node as they did for the last generation. And obviously that is going to change with the next generation, where we should expect to see 3 nanometer, right? It will be, effectively, there will be improvements. We shouldn't expect NVIDIA to be complacent on that regard. And at the same time, they always do seem to be looking to provide performance and features, with the exception of Blackwell for the reasons stated. 40 series came along, we got frame generation, even though in terms of performance increases, 40 series was pretty huge. Just a tad, unfortunately, it came with huge price increases as well. Ultimately, though, I don't know. It's ultimately a question of R&D, and NVIDIA has a lot more of it. At the same time, AMD is doing some really smart stuff at the moment. Really difficult to say. What could I say? It's impossible to tell at this point. There is always the hope, though, for this level playing field, because it should, in theory, bring about more competitive pricing. But at the same time, we've seen AMD make a value play with RDNA 4, and we're only now seeing MSRPs actually being achieved. Hasn't really seen any kind of massive change in the competitive landscape or in terms of market share. There's still so much to do in terms of actually, seeing any kind of change in market share. It's so deeply ingrained at this point that NVIDIA is kind of like synonymous with PC graphics. What do you think, John?
Never count AMD out. No. Actually, it is funny though. I do feel like this is just the usual pre-release stuff we always hear, right? It's always like whoever's not in first place always has the new killer product that's going to put the current leader on blast, and it never usually shakes out one way or the other. But obviously, AMD kind of really kicked Intel's butt recently, so there is a chance for a reversal at some point, but I do think NVIDIA is significantly stronger in their specific market versus where Intel was at the time. And they do continue to develop new features where Intel sort of reached the point where it was just kind of coasting, it felt like, at least on the CPU side. So I don't know, but yeah, go ahead.
I think it's the case where people kind of want to go back to the old days, the sort of GTX and RX days, where basically the GPUs did exactly the same job, fundamentally. There wasn't really that much to tell between them in terms of features, and therefore you could compare them on a more level playing field and make a call in terms of which one you wanted to purchase. NVIDIA has disrupted that with DLSS and its AI features. and it's basically left everybody else struggling to catch up. The only thing is that the NVIDIA market share in that kind of GTX/RX period was still heavily weighted towards NVIDIA. You have to go back a really, really long time to actually see that kind of 50-50 split between the vendors there. So there's a lot going on when it comes to competition in the GPU space. This question comes from Snorlax #1 Cat Pixel Peeper. I have no idea what that is all about. Now that we are in the age where the Coalition brought UE3 to PlayStation 5, would you like Arkham Knight enhanced for current gen? I bet Rocksteady could use the money after that Suicide Squad game. John, Arkham Knight. Come on now. Arkham Knight is deserving of a remaster. The question is what you do with it.
I think given how it runs on PCs, I don't know, 120 FPS on consoles, maybe doable. The CPU, I don't know. Either way, just having like a really nice, sharp, smooth running version of that on consoles coming back, I think would be really awesome.
You think it's the case, though, that, because it's definitely a game of its day, right, in terms of how it used Unreal Engine 3. It's kind of like peak Unreal Engine 3, right?
It is, and it still looks good, I think.
But the temptation is going to be that they're like port it to Unreal Engine 5 or something. Do you think that would be a bad move?
Yeah. I mean, they already tried to do that before with Return to Arkham.
Yes,
when they did the UE4, and it was horrible.
Great.
No, I think I think they should look at it. No, not doing it, but if they were, look at what they did with Gears Ultimate as the model, where they made changes to it to allow things like modern like motion vectors, which opens the door towards stuff like DLSS and modern temporal solutions. And yes, I know some people don't like those, but I feel like in my Gears video, it really showed very clearly how much of a benefit that stuff really is. The sheer volume of shimmering and noise you got from older style solutions, it's not great.
Yeah,
it's very, very noisy actually. So cleaning that up would go a long way with a game like Arkham Knight due to its like heavy reliance on like high contrast, quote unquote materials, not really materials, but you know what I mean. That has a lot of shimmer. So just, but the problem is like from a WB perspective, how does this tie into their marketing beat? Where does this fit? And I just don't really see any room for it because they don't seem to be the kind of company that just releases stuff because it would be cool. They've got to find the how does this make us long-term money and tie into our future strategy? Which is not
fit in the multiverse.
Which, by the way, not always a bad business choice, but with the games and the creative media, sometimes it is. Doesn't always work. And WB has found this out the hard way.
It went hilariously and rather sadly wrong, but they did bring Arkham Knight to the Switch. So, maybe there is some sort of mileage in bringing it to the current generation consoles. I think from my perspective, it is obviously a handsome game. Anti-aliasing, though, is a clear weakness.
Underrated, too. People were harsh on it. I think it's a great game.
Yeah. Alex, thoughts?
Yeah, the thing is, in terms of things that would add to it, the game technically doesn't have any shadows from its moon. I would love to see some shadows from that moon. That's really about it.
Physics?
I mean, I think it's otherwise pretty good. Well, yeah, making that cross some sort of portable version of physics technically doable now. I think with that's a 64-bit physics title.
Yeah,
right?
I think so.
Maybe I don't know if they actually open sourced that one. I know they did the 32-bit one at least. Yeah, I would love to see that cross-ported to some generic compute thing that works everywhere so everyone could see just how cool it was. Back then, I mean, I memed on the game too because it was awful at launch. But when it actually started with enough hardware and with, I don't know, the unlocked frame rate at 60 with all the physics effects working, it does look really cool still, even on PC. So that's what I would love other people to experience. So there's like just a lot of people memed on physics, but after the fact, I think people really liked it. They just, after when the vendor wars were over, everyone was like, actually, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
The vendor wars.
I think it's worth revisiting, right? Plain and simple, it's a great game. It can stand some improvement. Clearly, there were some issues in terms of like memory management that have only been overcome simply because PCs have become a whole lot more powerful. I do think there is a lot to be said about improving image quality on it. I don't think they should go too far, though. I'm kind of reminded of like something like Crysis 3 Remastered, where it was effectively modernized. They added some ray tracing, which wasn't hugely impactful, but it was there. They added DLSS, that sort of stuff. I don't think it needs like a sort of Oblivion remastered style effort.
No, not nearly as much as that. My goodness.
I also want to tip my hat to the original PS4 version of this game, because I felt like they perfectly targeted that console and delivered their vision perfectly. I said perfect too many times, but that's because it is. 30 FPS, yes, but this was a time coming from the generation where 30 FPS was like a pipe dream most of the time. So they delivered a completely stable 30 FPS with like no real issues at all, and it was native 1080p, which was the output of the console, and it just looked incredible, and it worked perfectly out of the gate, right off the disc. It was a really polished release on PS4, which I guess was the main version at the time.
Yeah.
So
okay, brilliant. Let's move on. A question here from Concrete Llama. As time passes, more and more people are getting VRR displays. How much longer do you think frame rate testing on fixed refresh displays will be relevant, or will it always be relevant? I recall you saying you were working on some solution for VRR capture/analysis and just wondered where it was at, and if going forward you will benchmark with that or continue to work primarily with fixed refresh rates. I think in the short term we'll be working with fixed refresh rates, because I still think that there's more of those TVs out there, unfortunately. We do have a VRR solution now, which is kind of emerging from beta, which if you look in the Gears Reloaded coverage, that was a weird one, right, John? Because the 120 hertz support on that seemed to be gated to VRR only, right?
yeah, it seemed to require VRR, and then also there was issues with, Xbox the VR didn't even work correctly. So
yeah, there's some weird stuff going on there for sure.
It created some troubles, that's for sure.
But if you look at the Gears Reloaded video, you'll see that yes, we've kind of cracked VRR now at this point on consoles, so we can actually do it, can get accurate readings, does support low frame rate compensation. Frame times seemed, I think we're pretty accurate on that as well, which is kind of crucial. You could see on Gears, for example, the VSync versus effect versus VRR. I think we did a pretty good job of highlighting that. So we're kind of there at the moment, but I still think the majority of testing will probably be on fixed refresh rate displays, I think. Yeah, it's a different discussion on our PC, right, Alex? I think,
I think everyone's pretty much got a VRR display on PC these days. The quality of the VRR displays, I can't attest to. I don't really know, but I think there's some really junky monitors out there, but there's enough good ones. The only thing that I want to say is that fixed rate testing gives me sometimes a greater insight into the things that just like you still want a good frame time experience.
Yep.
And fixed rate testing allows you to narrow that down a little bit easier than fully balls to the wall, unlocked performance testing. Because when you get into unlocked performance testing, if you're at the CPU limit, because your GPU is being underfed, so as Rich has said many times before, sometimes the frame times are way worse than they would have ever been if there was actually some CPU room there for it to breathe with. So I think fixed frame rate testing still has its point, and I think VSync makes that easier than relying on some sort of third-party tool to be doing this, where you're not sure if it's the issue with the third-party tool or if it's the issue with some other nebulous thing with like the game is doing. With VSync, it's like an industry standard that's existed for so long, and you can see the issues that either are from VSync side or from the game side. And so that's why I still like it, even in the era of like so much ubiquitous VRR on PC. But I think in my coverage, now that we have this tool, it will be a lot easier to start covering VRR in a like normalized way. The only thing I'm still worried about, though, is presenting that on YouTube in a way that doesn't look like crap.
I honestly think we should just stick with VSync off on PC, possibly with a frame rate limit, which would be limited to whatever the refresh rate is or slightly under. You could use like NVIDIA's frame view or present mon for actual specific sort of data there.
I think when presenting PC performance, it's really there's the hardware testing performance and there's the user experience performance, which you were kind of touching on, Alex, right?
Yeah.
And I think most PC sites only do the hardware testing, the raw numbers, benchmark stuff, which is interesting. But I think also explaining, showcasing the ways to get the most consistent user forward experience is just as important.
Yeah.
And they are not the same.
I have some issues in terms of like the kind of way PC performance is presented to the audience in terms of everything has got to be running fully flat out. I still don't really see the point of, measuring frames that you don't see if you've got 144 hertz display or 120 hertz display. And certainly, on the CPU side of things, it's the case that's like, you buy a CPU basically to improve your worst possible performance from CPU limited scenarios. Most of the time you should be GPU limited, right, for smoother performance. I'd go one further and say most of the time you should be hitting your refresh rate cap on your display, and similar to CPU, your GPU is basically used up to a certain point, and basically the extra performance used to maintain that fixed performance level, as opposed to just running completely unlocked. Which, if you did that on a G-Sync display, you'd basically be moving into screen tear territory, right? As you move out of the VRR window.
Yeah, you really want to be at that reflex position all the time, and that is a hard thing to. I don't even know how you start editing, putting that into a video form, and start saying this is what we want to target, presenting that visually to a user.
It's difficult.
Getting that.
It's difficult because their refresh rate cap might be different. Yeah, tricky.
All right.
Anyway, let's move on to the final question of the show. This one comes from Talon Strike. Amazing username there. With Digital Foundry now independent, are we going to see some additional Patreon tiers? May I suggest a higher tier called What's in the Box Rich, giving access to a monthly stream or recorded Let's Play where Audi sends Rich terrible games in the mail and Rich must play them. John and Audi to provide commentary / heckling. It would be like Mystery Science Theater 3000 meets DF Retro. I do like the way I'm being singled out for abuse here.
I'm all in. I'm ready to do this right now. Let's do it. I'm absolutely. I think Audie's on board too. We're good.
Well, I want
to do this right away.
I'd be on board for it as long as there is a similar level of punishment for you guys as well in maybe different segments.
You have to figure out ways to do that then.
Well, I've already thought of one, John. I'm going to team up with Mr. Beast, right? And basically, yep. And I'm going to put you into a room with 500 crap LCDs, and we're going to basically live stream it 24/7. And if you survive for 100 days, you'll get Mr. Beast will give you $500,000 or something. But I don't think you will.
That'd be pretty rough.
Yeah.
How are you supposed to get away from all those backlights? It's like having the sun on you all the time.
I know, right?
Yeah, I'm just picturing a sort of John in the middle and a sort of Hall of Mirrors effect of just hundreds of really crap LCDs.
Oh my god! Wow.
I don't know what we could do for you, Alex. I have to think of something particularly cool and unusual. Maybe sort of a sort of mod.
No, I
PC,
I have an idea.
A PC level, system level mod, which basically introduces random stutter at any point. And
I was thinking
the variation of the stutter will also be randomized from I don't know, maybe 10 to 500 milliseconds.
Oh my god!
Lock him in a room. I say we lock you in a room, play your favorite albums over the speaker, but insert random stutters into them that never go away.
Yeah.
It skips.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, that's all the Britney Spears torture. The CIA's done.
Come along. Was What's in the Box, Rich, really comparable to being tortured in a room for 100 days, Rich?
Yes.
No.
Put simply.
But generally, I think the idea of, as a result of our independence, us doing more Patreon-focused stuff is the good, and the fun stuff is actually great. It's just a matter of building into the time to do it, or even just finding the random time to do it. When we have a day, half a day to not do anything, maybe it's oh, let's just do something really silly. John and I just really quickly play something or something like that. I think that'd be a lot of fun because John and I, we've talked about before, but there's a whole bunch of junk games that ran on Unreal Engine 3 in the PS360 generation that really don't deserve a retro PC time capsule. But, they deserve at least us talking about junky UE3 games.
Well,
what did we call it?
There is John Versus, the series on Patreon,
video.
where John basically just plays some games which we understand not to be very good.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, John, you've enjoyed it. You've enjoyed the experience.
I know, that's the problem. I've picked games that are too bad.
I'm not sure about Power World, though. I'm not sure you enjoyed that one.
Actually, I didn't.
No.
It was funny at the time, but I did not enjoy playing that.
Amazing scenes.
Mind's Eye, though?
Yes.
Man.
You enjoyed that one.
That was kind of crazy. Anyway,
that was a good one.
That was the final question there for the end of the show. So please do like, subscribe, share if you enjoyed it. Ring bells for notifications for you and potential algorithmic boosts for us. Yes, DF supporter program. We are now fully independent. We do require your assistance to do what we do, and that would be absolutely fantastic. And of course, store.digitalfoundry.net for our merchandising wares. But that's all from us on this one. Thanks for watching and supporting DF Digital Foundry. And I guess we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.